Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning from whatever time zone you're in and on whatever land you're on. My name is Sarah Audsley, and I'm the Writing Across Media Facilitator at Vermont Studio Center. I'm so pleased to have our virtual visiting writer Keija Parssinen here with us today, who is also a Vermont Studio Center alum and worked in Maverick Studio buildings 2 years ago. It's always really a pleasure of mine to be able to bring someone who's been a resident, writing resident back as in this role. She is the author of the novels The Ruins of Us, which earned a Michener-Copernicus Award, and The Unraveling of Mercy Louis, which won an Alex Award from the American Library Association. Her work has appeared in the New York Review of Books Daily, Gulf Coast, the Southern Review, the Washington Post, Slate, Salon, and the Lonely Planet travel writing anthologies, among others, and is forthcoming in Letters to a Stranger, Essays to Those Who Haunt Us. She's a recipient of fellowships for MacDowell, Yaddo, and Hedgebrook, and she is currently an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Kenyon College, where she serves as a consulting editor for the Kenyon Review. I dropped in a link to a handout that we may be using, and then also a link to a poem which we may or may not get to. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Keija. Thanks for being here with us today.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here with you all this morning, and I'm especially excited to see my friend Chris Brunelli. Hi, Chris. Oh my gosh. How are you?
I'm well. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. Where are you right now?
I'm in New Jersey. We live in New York now.
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful.
We went to the Vermont Studio Center residency at the same time, so I got to know Keija a lot then, and I missed her very much.
It's so wonderful to see you, especially because I was just talking about Chris last night with Sarah, because Chris was amazing. Like when we were at VSC, this was in 2019 in the summer, Chris just offered to take author photos for like anybody, or even artist headshots for anybody who wanted them, like any of the artists or writers. And those of you who have paid for headshots before, you know, like what a gift that is to have a wonderful artist and photographer take your photo. So actually the headshot that was used to advertise this seminar was taken by Chris. So yeah, I love that shot. You're very talented, Chris. And that was so generous of you. And how many of you have been to VSC as residents? Have any of you been? Hannah, you've been? And when did you go?
Let's see, I was there in March of 2019.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I came just right after you. Wonderful. Yeah. And you just joined us. Did you raise your hand that you had been to VSC? I don't see your name there, but when were you there?
I've been in 2017 and 2019.
Oh, wonderful.
I'd like to come back.
Yeah, I know. It's a really magical place. Anyone else been there? If you do have a chance to go, Lynn, you've been there? And when did you go?
I was trying to remember. I feel like I can't. Sarah could tell. It was the fall. It was in November. I want to say 2018, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 2019.
I feel like our memories.
I could look in the database, but
I don't know. It feels like both like just last month and like 25 years ago.
Exactly. Our sense of time, I think, is completely warped because of last year. Anyway, so some of you know the magic that is VSC. And for those of you who don't, I hope you have an opportunity to go at some point. Any kind of residency is just special to have that time to devote to your art and your writing uninterrupted, and to have that really centered and valued by an organization is wonderful. But there's something special about VSC in particular because it's such a big residency. Like to me, it felt, I've been to a few and it really just, there was such a vibrancy to it. And I loved getting to meet all the visual artists as well. And then it really just had this sort of like summer camp for artists and writers vibe. And that, I don't know, that's like my version of heaven. So I was really, really happy there. So anyway, there's my plug for VSC, though it does not need one. It's pretty obvious how great it is. So a little bit more about me. I teach up at Kenyon. I've been here. I'm starting my 3rd year at Kenyon College. Today's seminar is going to be on place, and specifically on writing place beyond flora and fauna. So, hi, Victoria. Welcome. I'm glad to see you.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi, Victoria was one of my manuscript consultations yesterday. So we got to talk about her wonderful memoir. So I'm glad you're here. But place, I think I'm always thinking about place because most of my stories and all of my novels have started with place. Some people, Sarah, I know one of your questions yesterday, my reading was going to be about like, what do I start with first, plot or character? And I actually don't start with plot or character. I start with place. Like it really is about mood and atmosphere and place for me. My first novel, The Ruins of Us, is set in Saudi Arabia. And I grew up in Saudi. I was born there and I lived there till I was 12. My mother also grew up there. And, I think it's my life's work as an artist to reckon with that and that childhood and what that place meant to me and my family and what our role was, not only in, we were talking about climate change earlier. My father and grandfather both worked for the largest oil company in the world, Aramco. So, that's been providing us with the cheap oil that has sped up this crisis we're in right now, this climate crisis. So there's that. And there's also the fact that, we were Americans, we were expats, yes, but there was a very sort of like neo-colonial vibe to Aramco. It was, first of all, like founded on like very much Jim Crow laws of the 50s. And so there was a very stratified and racialized element to the compound where we lived. And so I'm really just diving into that complexity in my work. So my 3rd book, which I actually finished my rough draft when I was at VSC. And we, along with a couple of other residents, we printed up our manuscripts and stood on top of them and like popped some champagne. And it was so fun. I highly recommend that to all of you when you finish your draft of your book, no matter how messy it is, right? Like that book was a hot mess. I think I wrote like the crappiest pages just to get it done at the end, but it felt so good to just like stand on it and be like, woohoo. Plus I was like 4 inches taller because it was 500 pages. So anyway, so that was a blast. But that book is very much about place. It's about Aramco specifically, which is this oil company that my family has been a part of for generations. And, as I mentioned, my first novel is set in Saudi Arabia too. My 2nd book is set in Texas, which is where we moved after we left Saudi Arabia. It's set in Southeast Texas in a refinery town, again, sort of connected to this like petro universe. And I just find that there's something that opens up in me as a writer when I start to envision myself, like, and close my eyes and envision myself in the setting that I want to achieve or convey in my writing. And then everything kind of flows from that. So place is really, really important to me in my writing. So I thought it would be fun to talk about a place today. So before we really get rolling though, I would love to hear a little bit more about each of you. And then we're going to do a fun sort of quick little activity about place that will lead into a broader discussion, sort of sparked by an essay that Dorothy Allison wrote in the Writer's Notebook, which are craft essays from Tin House. These are great craft books, but like so many craft books of a certain era, you look at them now and you're like, wow, every single person is white, or like 90% of the writers are white. And so I no longer use these as my textbooks because it's just embarrassing. But like I still do use these essays, you know, when I teach my classes. So there are gems in there, but you know, I recommend other books too. So, but yeah, first let's maybe just go around, and I'd love to hear your name, maybe where you are currently, where you're from, and tell me a little bit about your work and what you're working on right now. So maybe we can just kind of go around, maybe start with Hannah, go around the little grid.
Yeah, hi. It's so nice to meet you here, even virtually. I've been so grateful for Zoom. I'm in all these writers' talks that I live in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And there's not normally this kind of caliber of writing going on. So it's nice to be able to join in. I am a fiction writer, although when I was at VSC, I was finishing a memoir, anyway, and I'm getting my MFA right now from Bennington. So I'm working on some short stories, and which are also very much based in place. And so I really relate to that. Is it Kay? I just want to pronounce your name correctly. Can you just?
Yeah, it's Keija.
Keija, okay, yeah. So I really, setting stories in place really rings true to me. So I'm excited.
Great. And Hannah, did you also grow up in the Berkshires, or is that just your home now?
I did. I grew up in Stockbridge, left for about 10 years to New York City and moved back in 2017.
Great.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with it, it's about 4 hours south of good old Johnson. So
yeah, cool. And when I think of the Berkshires, I always think of that James Taylor song, you know, where it's so
yes,
yeah.
He lives there. So I give him always little waves at the grocery store.
Are you serious? Oh my God. So jealous.
Yeah.
My musical tastes are wide ranging. I had a friend when I lived in Tulsa who she lived near Garth Brooks. And so she would see him in like CBS all the time. And I was like equally like, oh my God. So yeah, this is what happens to you when you grow up on a compound that like doesn't really have culture. You have these sort of scattershot tastes. So James Taylor, Garth Brooks, you know, but that's awesome. Love it. Okay, Lynn, what about you?
Hi. So I'm currently in Dobbs Ferry, New York, which is on the Hudson, just up from Manhattan. And I grew up not far, just on the other side of Westchester, on the Long Island Sound side in Larchmont. So so suburban place is kind of what's kind of in my blood. And I write both poetry and short fiction. I have a collection of short stories that I am currently trying to get representation for, and I'm continuing to write more short fiction and poetry. So yeah.
Great, cool. And Lynn, it's funny you mentioned like suburbia, because I also grew up in suburbia, both in Saudi and then also in Texas. And I've always felt like, oh, there's nothing interesting there. But then, then I started reading like, The Ice Storm and Tom Perrotta. And I'm like, you can really get into the weirdness of the suburbs. So every place is a place, you just have to kind of
right.
find...
There's like a weird guilt when you say suburbs, like it's not a place, but you're right. Every place is a place.
Every place is a place. And now, of course, the suburbs have such a bad connotation because of like Donald Trump. But anyway, yeah. So the poor suburbs, let's just stop crapping on the suburbs. They are a place. Yeah, great. My brother actually lives in Austining, so not farther up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the Hudson River Valley. So beautiful. And I mean, talk about like a place where wonderful art and writing have been made. So that's great. Okay. Marquita, I don't know if you're with us or...
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi.
So yeah, no, I'm actually a visual artist. I did apply for the VSC program, I think last year when I found out about it. So just have been really interested in the programming. Zoom programming. So I'm just kind of like wanted to listen. I have an interest in poetry and have, but it's not, I'm more of a visual artist. So just wanted to kind of, be a fly on the wall.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And where are you based, Marquita?
Okay, so I am relocated to Northern California. Have been the last 4 years in Miami, and so I'm living right now in Northern California.
Oh, cool. Both amazing places. I love Miami. What a great.
It's interesting art city, visual art city. It's with Art Basel and just a lot of great venues.
Yeah, great museums. I'm actually going down there with my family in August for 4 days. We've just found it's a good place to go with kids because there's a beach, but there's also fun, interesting stuff for grownups like art museums and galleries. So yeah, I feel like you live in two places that have really good light, right? Did that have something to do with your choices?
Well, I'm from the Bay Area, so I'm just kind of, it was a lot of family stuff going on, but I won't go into that. But I'll put some stuff in the chat as far as Miami. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Great. Well, welcome. Really glad to have you here. I find it interesting too that a lot of times people I know who are both sort of literary and visual artists, they are more like poets. And I think there's something about poetry, whether it's like imagistic, that sort of works well with the artist mind. So anyway, glad to have you here, Marquita. And Alex, welcome.
Hi. I live in Vermont, and I've given it a lot of thought. I've really chosen Vermont, and I'm glad I live here. Place is incredibly important to the idea of who I am, even. I was born in northern Ohio, between Akron and Cleveland. And so very familiar with the Midwest. But I came to Vermont after living in New York and doing some metropolitan things. I'm not going to extol Vermont at length because it's already good that it's small, but it's a wonderful place to be. So place is very important to my life, but it is, and I write fiction, I write prose fiction, I write books, not stories. I'm very interested in figuring out how to write stories, but all I know about is novels so far. And I've set them in places that I've lived, like New York and Midwestern towns, other than the particular one I lived in. But I'm now doing something risky in the book I'm writing now. I'm writing about a place I haven't even visited. And you might just say, well, I have a trap door that will open right now and snap you out because that's a little too much. You better go there. I'm writing about people who live in Oklahoma City. And I've picked this place for a lot of reasons about the plot and events of the story. I need Tinker Air Force Base. I need petrochemicals. It's maybe interesting to you in the end. And I need that type of America. But the problem is, I don't know it well enough. I might read your book to find out more about Tulsa. That's how bad it's getting. Anyway.
Yeah. Go out there. Oklahoma, man. I just like Saudi Arabia.
I will eventually, but
I only lived in Oklahoma for 4 years, but I'll never stop writing about it. Talk about a weird, complicated, haunted place. I feel like any place in America is haunted, right? Because of our history. But in particular, Oklahoma feels especially haunted. The end of the Trail of Tears, the race massacre. So that, and I really felt it there. I didn't know about the race massacre when I moved to Tulsa in 2015, but almost right away, I was like, we've made a huge mistake. To my husband, I was like, I just felt there was something about the place that I was like, this is not going to work. And I'm not sort of a coastal city snob. I dig the Midwest. I grew up on an oil compound in Saudi Arabia, for God's sakes. I'm not a picky person about where I live. But I just knew that there was something off about the place. And I know that sounds sort of kooky, but then the more I learned about the history, I was like, this all makes sense. Like, it's such a deeply like segregated, complicated place, and deeply conservative too, of course. I find it interesting, Alex. I love that you've deliberately chosen Vermont as like your sort of soulmate place. What, Cleveland wasn't speaking to your soul? I mean, come on.
Hey, there are great things in the land. I am still very partial to the Midwest.
Yeah.
And idiotically, I have never convinced anyone of this. I think the prairie is more beautiful than the mountains. But this is a long topic.
Yeah, it is.
I didn't even get prairie, but I lived in flat areas. But I like the East, and I like it. I just came here from a walk. That's why my hair looks so bad. I just get to go walking every day in the woods, and there are goldfinches perching on my windowsill. So I can't keep explaining why it's perfect here, but it really is.
Oh, I love that you've found your place, because that is a life's journey, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And it's really good. It feels really good when you feel settled and rooted, like the land is speaking to you. So I'm happy for you. Chris, do you want to share with the group?
Sure. So I'm actually in New Jersey right now at the house I grew up in a suburb of New Jersey. And I felt like my place was New York City since I was like 16, and going into the city and seeing rent and fantasizing about living in a crappy apartment with a candle that is warming me. And I eventually did all that, almost literally, and lived in New York City for about 7 years. And then I moved to Colorado, where I lived for 5 years, and then to North Carolina for my MFA. And now I'm back in New York City. So it definitely feels like a homecoming in a lot of ways, to be back in New York. All of those places have influenced my writing, and I'm excited to see how being back in New York will really affect it as well. I read a really fantastic craft book by Eudora Welty, and she talks about sort of how place and people it's really hard for her to separate those two.
Yes.
And she like recalls her mother's like seamstress, or the woman who would come over and fit their dresses and things, and they would have conversation. And that inspired her work so much, just these conversations between these two women. And I feel like that for me is like, when I think about place and how it's influenced my work, like my mother, I come from a big extended Italian American family with lots of chatter and drama. And so I think really, those two elements make up the drama of my work. It's just sort of ordinary drama. I write short stories. So yeah, I'll stop there, but.
Awesome. I see Victoria nodding at like the big Italian family with lots of chatter. We talked a little bit about her her amazing Italian name, which means what? Beneath the Saints, did you say?
Oh, lovely.
So beautiful. I love it. You've been given a lot of gifts. Like, also Victoria grew up in a dump in a town called Freedom, New Hampshire. Okay. So that's just a book right there. Like, and you write so beautifully about it. So anyway, Chris, so glad to have you with us. And your work is so beautiful. And I definitely want to catch up. I'm going to email you and we'll catch up properly. All right. Is it Shalita?
Yeah. People never get it right. Thank you. I'm Shalita. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I live in Cleveland, Ohio.
Ooh, Ohio.
Yeah. I'm a poet and author and disability rights activist. Last year I published my first poetry collection. So yeah.
What's it called, Shalita?
It's called The Lazarus Girl. Yeah, so I'm really still excited about that, happy about that. Right now, I'm kind of working on a collection of essays based on my life, being disabled and Black and living in, inner city of Cleveland, Ohio, and, just me growing up. Yeah, so I've lived in Cleveland my whole life. I lived in Pittsburgh for college. Other than that, I've never really lived anywhere else. In Georgia for a little bit as a kid, but Cleveland is definitely home. But I'm definitely ready to kind of explore the world and see everything out there.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like that's an increasingly rare story to be from a place and still be living there and to feel a sense of fromness and rootedness, so I envy you that. And yeah, what's great is like you have this wonderful home base and that's your launch pad, and now you can see the world and still feel like you've got your home base, which is really lovely and a gift too. So I'm going to look up your poetry collection. I'm wondering about Cleveland's literary scene. Does it have a pretty robust one?
It's definitely a smaller one. I actually went to for high school, I went to performing arts school and I studied creative writing. So
awesome.
So I mean that was like 10 years ago, but a lot of the people, that I went to high school with, and we still kind of, keep in touch. And that's pretty much the extent of the, writing scene here. It's definitely growing. Cleveland is growing like every year as far as arts. We do have a great art scene. So it's great.
Yeah, I've been very pleased with Columbus. Like, there's some wonderful writers here. Like Saeed Jones just moved here, and Hanif Abdurraqib lives here, and he's like a big Ohio guy who like totally defender of the Midwest. And Maggie Smith, the poet, and then we have like, of course, Kenyon Review, and they've got some wonderful artists they're always bringing in. And I say them because I'm part of it, but I'm also like not like primarily my role at Kenyon is as a professor. But I love to be sort of peripherally, tangentially part of Kenyon Review because it's such a vibrant community. And I live in this little village called Granville. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Shalita. It's probably not because it's but it's outside Columbus, about 30 minutes, and I just love it. It's so beautiful. It's in the hills. Like people don't believe there are hills in Ohio.
Really?
Because it's like right as you're heading into Appalachia, it's the start of the hilliness.
Nice.
Like going into Pennsylvania and stuff. And it's really lovely. So I'm like very pleasantly surprised here. Being an academic, I don't have a lot of choice, right? In where I live. And so I'm like, oh, this is nice. Like this is definitely better than Tulsa.
Yeah. I love Cleveland. We have Lake Erie here, and I've wrote a couple of poems. It's in that poetry collection, actually, featuring Lake Erie because it's such a huge part of, I feel like who I am because, I grew up right, near the lake. A lot of people don't get that, experience.
Yeah. And isn't Lorraine like near on Lake Erie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's like our native daughter. So like, it's just, I feel like Ohio is just where it's at, in a lot of ways. So that's awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, last but not least, Victoria.
Hey guys, so good to hear everyone's places. I'm currently in Hanover, New Hampshire, so right near Dartmouth College on the line of Vermont. I'm from Arlington, Massachusetts, which is right outside of Cambridge, and I lived there until my family was until I was 10, 11, and then my folks moved up to a town called Freedom, New Hampshire, and actually, place has always been really important to me. I don't think I've been super conscious of it actually, maybe at one point, but like talking with Keija and just having this conversation, like, oh my gosh, place is such a big part. I think context is so important to me, even in like understanding a conversation. I'm like, wait, where are we? Like, what are you talking about? So maybe that's part of it is I just need to like see to learn something. But I just naturally gravitate towards that. And my MFA thesis was a memoir that was called Freedom. I thought it was very clever, but then after revising it, it's actually now called A Place Called Freedom. And before we had this conversation, and so place is very important to me. obviously literal and figurative. And then what was I going to say? Also, it's cool, like going back to that manuscript and revising and finding things like buried in the setting that I never knew before. Like I have a piece called Bottles that I was writing, and then I was like, I feel like something's missing, like the setting. I want to explore that more. And then like found Rattlesnake Mountain behind the house where we were huffing ether. And I was like, oh my gosh, starter fluid, snakes, venom, poison, and I got like really excited about it. Probably way too excited. But anyway, it was great because it got published and was like, that's so exciting to me that there's so many riches within a landscape that like we just have to pay attention and kind of dig, like take out the shovel and get going. And even like revising the piece now, going back and having a flashback from like today, because I'm adding my kind of narrative today to the old narrative that was kind of strictly in that place and time and never really floated out of it, which was its weakness. But and just picturing like a scene with my mom like ranting on the phone when she's crazy, and I'm like, where is she sitting? I was like, oh, I think she was sitting at Mount Madness. And I was like, oh my gosh, Mount Madness, like this is so cool. And then I researched Mount Madness and like the history of Mount Madness, and these poets like named it, and like I looked at photos of inside Mount Madness and all the graffiti, and like my grandfather's name is like spray painted on the wall. Not that I would use that detail, maybe in poetry or something. Somewhere I could use that detail, but I'm like, this is amazing. So like I just love setting and like place, and I think it's because I'm so visual, and like I can't help but make a metaphor out of literally everything. Like they called me Mrs. Metaphor, and I'm like, I'm sorry. They're like, you're a poet. I was like, well, we're all poets. But no, I do write poetry and fiction too. And the short story I've been working on for a couple of years is called Home of the Wolves, and it's because Tionesta, Pennsylvania, is the name of the place, and that Tionesta means home of the wolves. And so I kind of start with place, and I let that dictate my characters and kind of tell me what happens. Like, I had a cool opening scene, but then was like, where the heck is this place? Like, let me look up some cool towns. Like, and then Tionesta, and I just saw Home of the Wolves. I'm like, that's the story. Like, I don't even know what the story is, but that's it. So I'm going to like right towards that. And it was really, really fun. So I love place. I love Tionesta. I've never been there, but my dad's from rural Pennsylvania. So I'll have to go to all the places.
Well, I find it really interesting that both Victoria and Alex are talking about being drawn towards writing about places that they've never been, like Oklahoma City and Tionesta. And I think that's wonderful. And I think you follow those little threads, those little gifts of curiosity and see where it leads you. And, Alex, like one day you'll get on a plane and you'll go down to Oklahoma, and first of all, the prairie is stunning down there. It's so dramatic. I think you're really gonna, find all kinds of riches there. But in the meantime, there is sort of this privilege of the imagination when you haven't been, right? When you can think about what the place represents to your imagination. Like you talked, but you mentioned something interesting, which was like, you want to write about that kind of America. And I just thought, I wonder what Alex thinks that kind of America is. Like, what does Oklahoma City represent? And that's a really interesting question. So I love that you're thinking that way symbolically about place. So yeah. Anyway, I think those are little crumbs that we as writers should take seriously. And Victoria, it's interesting, these metaphors, I mean, you can't make them up. Mount Madness, like it's, if you were to call it that, it's like too on the nose, right? Your fiction workshop instructor would be like, no, you can't call it Mount Madness because it's too on the nose. But again, you're being given these gifts as a writer, and we all are, right? Because we're all from a place. We all can look into the history of that place, look into the naming. I'm thinking about Chris, New Jersey, and all of the like Native American names that are used there, and like that I never even remarked. Like I went to college in New Jersey, and like you'd see them on the signs, and I was like, oh, there's so many like interesting, long, difficult names in New Jersey, and I never connected to that Native American history because I don't think of Jersey as being Native American, but of course every place in America is Native American. So anyway, all places have history, have details, and it's a matter of opening your eyes to those details. So this is sort of a perfect point to segue into this quote by Dorothy Allison that was sort of the inspiration for today's seminar. And it sort of affirms a lot of what you all have been talking about, particularly related to how place is made up of a lot more than just visual detail, right? Visual description. So here is the quote. It's rather long, so but I'm just going to read. It's a couple paragraphs. She says, so let's review what place is. Place is visual detail, manicured grass or scrubby weeds, broken concrete or pristine tarmac glistening with morning dew. Place is conditions, weather, atmosphere. Are the roads crowded or are they empty? When you step outside your house in the morning and you hit that clean, cool sidewalk, are there people walking around? Are they looking at you or are they looking away? Are you lonely? Are you nervous? Place requires context, just as Victoria was saying. Is it responsive? Does it notice me? Or is it porcelain, pristine, and just ignoring my passage through? Are there people on the street who flinch when I smile at them? Is there a reason they do that? Place is where the eye goes. Place is what the eye looks at, what it doesn't look at. Is it happy? Is it sad? Is it afraid? Is it curious? Now here's the real kicker. What I am trying to say is that place is not just landscape. A list of flora and fauna and street names. That's not place. That's not even decent research. Which brings me to my next point, blah, blah, blah. And then she kind of goes on. But I love that. Place is not just landscape, a list of flora and fauna. Because I think when we think about setting, right, we're just thinking about visuals. But it's so much more than that. And we're going to take a look at a Jamaica Kincaid story called Girl. Some of you have probably read that story before, but we're going to talk about how she conjures place through details other than the visual. Because, you know, to me, like, you know, place is it's culture, place is people, place is politics, place is history, place is sex. Like, what are the attitudes towards sex in this place? You know, which for me, growing up in Saudi Arabia, you know, sex is a defining feature of that culture because of its absolute absence from the public dialogue, right? So just by not ever talking about it, it looms so large in everybody's mind there, which is interesting. So then she goes on to say something, and this is pretty funny. And then we're going to do a little writing activity sort of inspired by this. She says, place is emotion. She says, I'm going to say some unscrupulous, terrible, horrible things that are absolutely true in my mind, if not in yours. Central Florida is despair. New York City is sex. California is smug. Boston has never gotten over Henry James. Seattle and Portland lie about their weather. Iowa City is one hotel room and a chlorine stink away from the suburbs of hell. So that list just cracks me up. So place is also opinion. And Sarah and I were kind of talking about this last night in my writer chat, because she was sort of pushing me and saying, well, you know, you say that the author, the writer, the fiction writer is not a propagandist, but certainly you must have opinions about the places you're writing about. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And that also is what can make place pop alive on the page. You're not just writing like a fly on the wall from a neutral vantage point, right? You are writing with the opinions you have accrued with a lifetime's worth of experience of places. Or, you know, in the case of like Alex with Oklahoma City, a place she hasn't experienced, but has an opinion of. And we all have those places, you know, like I've never been to, let's see, I've been to a lot of places. So I'm like, where do I have strong feelings about? You know, I've never been to Wyoming, but I have a strong sense of like the kind of man who lives in Wyoming, you know, on his ranch with his big truck. So what I want us to do now is I want you to make a little list of 5 or 6 places that you've been to or not been to that you have sort of a strong opinion of. And I want you to find a way to summarize that sentiment as Dorothy Allison does here in this list, without sort of just falling back on sort of that easy description, like Florida is palm trees and the beach, you know, or whatever. So really trying to dig deeper than that sort of more superficial landscape kind of flora fauna stuff. So I'll give you about 6 minutes to work on that, and then we'll share and talk a little bit about the Jamaica Kincaid. So, and feel free to turn off your video while you're working. All right. Does anyone want to share their highly opinionated list?
I'll share if I got it right. I wrote a description about one place. Is that what you wanted?
That's perfect. Really, whatever you've done is fine. So yeah, go ahead and share.
Okay. Stockbridge Coffee and Tea is my family represented in items. My mother's paintings adorning the walls, my husband's faded farm CSA printout in the window, and an illustration of my father reading a book on Castro, greeting the customers as I walk through the stained glass swinging doors.
Oh, lovely. So your family owns a coffee shop in the Berkshires? Am I getting that right?
They don't own it.
Oh, that's just the sense of your family. I love it. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Does anyone else want to share?
I wrote a little
Shalita?
free write. Oh, I'm sorry, Shalita.
No, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Okay. I just wrote a free write. I just went with it. So I'm just going to read that. My writing studio, a tin box up a hill, a recycled vessel. 1 year ago, ordered and arriving on our property, paid for by my old man's credit card to serve as his makeshift workshop. A year ago, I was lifting heavy boxes from the house we lost, a third of my father's tools and supplies from a lifelong carpentry business, into this 12-by-6 metal house. Wire rack stacked with paint cans and oil tubes, draped in bungee cords, standing tall where my IKEA desk now sits. Now he is back with my mom, in the heart of the whirlwind that first shot him out, bloodied and bruised, burdened, as he walked onto our land. Now I live here in the cool space and shadow of where my father would drink, and I write stories about what it means to be his daughter. I'm still learning how to see where I am, who I am. There's a metal screen, like a prison wall, protecting the screen from caving in over my window. It's how I see the world, I suppose, guarded, distant, afraid to walk into the unknown. It's beyond the bars that terrify me, the sun, the beautiful maple that hangs its green bunches of leaves like a mother holding her hands out, the birds flying around, singing some song. I'm trying to hear it, learn it. I'm working on breathing.
I think you captured place as emotion really well. But also like relationship too, the relationship between your parents and how it's represented by the shifting structures around you. Great, nice work. Shalita, would you like to share?
So I did multiple places, but I'll just read one. Ireland, a hutch of bunnies, lambs, a hot mug of lion's tea, a garden of my own behind my cottage, isolated but not alone.
Was the first line our land?
Ireland.
Oh,
Ireland. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Great. Yeah. See, you're able to capture so much. I'm amazed by the economy of language. I mean, each of you has conveyed a great deal in very little space and time. So remember that too. You don't need, great groaning paragraphs of description to make people feel something or have a sense of place. And that's why I love the Dorothy Allison, because just in like these pithy sort of almost like aphoristic sentences, she creates this sense of a place. And hers is really much more about like mood. I notice still you all are gravitating in your writing towards describing physical objects and what surrounds you. So I'll just sort of use this as the opportunity to push you to go even further than that and to really think about what Allison is saying in terms of like, you know, and I'll read that list again that she wrote. You know, Central Florida is despair. New York City is sex. California is smug. You know, these are like attitudes, right? The attitude of a place, the spirit of a place. So be thinking about that and considering that in your own writing. Because of course, place is all five senses. It's not just visual, but it's also beyond the senses to something like attitude as well. Seattle and Portland lie about their weather. What's funny about what she's doing in this list is she's, of course, imbuing these places with human traits, right? Human characteristics, that as if they have these sorts of attitudes. And it can really feel that way sometimes, you know. I'm sure you've all had that reaction to a place like I did with Tulsa, where I was like, I'm not at home here. I'm not comfortable here. This place doesn't want me. It doesn't like me. Like, you know, it was a very insular place. That's how I'll describe Tulsa, very insular, and sort of in a defensive crouch. So think about that when you're trying to describe a place. And of course, place is not just geographical, right? As Victoria wrote, place is a home. Place is, like Hannah wrote, place is a coffee shop, and what's on the walls and what that reflects back to you about yourself and the people who are sort of in that space as well. So we don't have a ton of time. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm going to send a PDF of the Dorothy Allison essay to you all via Sarah. So she can distribute that to you all. And then I'm also, what I'll leave you with now is I'm going to ask one of you to read this story by Jamaica Kincaid, Girl. And then I'm going to leave you with some questions to consider about this story and how she's conveying a sense of place without ever mentioning that place. So let's see, we've got the screen share here, active speaker video. Shalita, you are the one who appears in my active speaker video for whatever reason, so I'm going to pick on you. Would you mind just reading these 3 pages of Girl by Jamaica Kincaid?
Okay. Wash the white clothes on Monday and put them on the stone heap. Wash the color clothes on Tuesday and put them on the clothesline to dry. Don't walk barehead in the hot sun. Cook pumpkin fritters in very hot sweet oil. Soak your little cloths right after you take them off. When buying cotton to make yourself a nice blouse, be sure that it doesn't have gum on it, because that way it won't hold up well after a wash. Soak salt fish overnight before you cook it. It is true that you sing Benna in Sunday school. Always eat your food in such a way that it won't turn someone else's stomach. On Sundays, try to walk like a lady and not like the slut you are. So bent on becoming. Don't sing Benna in Sunday school. You mustn't speak to wharf rat boys, not even to give directions. Don't eat fruits on the down to play. Don't eat fruits down to play marble. Oh wait. Don't eat fruits on the street. Flies will follow you. But don't sing Benna on Sundays at all. Never in Sunday school. This is how to sew on a button. This is how to make a buttonhole for the button you have just sewed on. This is how to hem a dress when you see the hem coming down. And so to prevent yourself from looking like the slut I know you are so bent on becoming, this is how you iron your father's khaki shirt so that it doesn't have a crease. This is how you iron your father's khaki pants so that they don't have a crease. This is how you grow okra far from the house, because okra tree harbors red ants. When you are growing dasheen, make sure it gets plenty of water or else it will make your throat itch when you're eating it. This is how you sweep a corner. This is how you sweep a whole house. This is how you sweep a yard. This is how you smile to someone you don't like. This is how you smile to someone you don't like too much. This is how you smile to someone you don't like at all. This is how you smile to someone you like completely. This is how you set a table for tea. This is how you set a table for dinner. This is how you set a table for dinner with an important guest. This is how you set a table for lunch. This is how you set a table for breakfast. This is how to behave in the presence of men who don't know you very well. In this way, they won't recognize immediately the slut I have warned you against becoming. Be sure to wash every day, even if it is with your own spit. Don't squat. Don't squat down to play marbles. You are not a boy. Don't pick people's flowers. You might catch something. Don't throw stones at blackbirds because it might not be a blackbird at all. This is how to make bread pudding. This is how to make Dakona. This is how to make pepper pot. This is how to make a good medicine for a cold. This is how to make a good medicine to throw away after a child before it even becomes a child. This is how to catch a fish. This is how to throw back a fish you don't like. And that way, something bad won't fall on you. This is how to bully a man. This is how a man bullies you. This is how to love a man. If this doesn't work, there are other ways. And if they don't work, don't feel too bad about giving up. This is how to spit up in the air if you feel like it. And this is how to move quick so that it doesn't fall on you. This is how to make ends meet. Always squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh. But what if the baker won't let me feel the bread? You mean to say that after all, you are really going to be the kind of woman who the baker won't let near the bread?
Thank you so much for reading that, Shalita. That last line just always cracks me up. First of all, I think it's just perfect to talk about this story because Jamaica Kincaid apparently lives in North Bennington, Vermont. Who knew? Not me. But yeah, I think she teaches in Vermont. But anyway, I know we're out of time, so I won't sort of go on at length, but maybe if you all could weigh in on the question of how place is characterized in this story. I think she's doing something very interesting. So I guess actually before we get to that question, where are we in this story? Do we know? And how do we know?
I don't know where we are because I'm not sure I've been there, but I think if I had, I could maybe suss it out with some of the food items and other little details that would make someone know where this is. I won't hedge a guess, but if I knew those foods and those little details, then I might be able to know.
Totally. That is definitely a clue she's giving us, right? Food is place, because it's part of culture, right? It's a big part of place. Anyone else want to offer some observations about this story and how she's characterizing place and maybe hazard a guess as to where we are?
She gives us a sense of some expectations of girls in the culture and the place and the time in which the girl is growing up.
Very much so. Yeah, this is, the dynamic is such that it's sort of like a mother, right, talking to a daughter, or an older woman talking to a younger woman. So we gain a sense of women's place in this place and the attitude toward women, and the expectations of women in this place. So again, it's just sort of done masterfully. We have a strong sense. I mean, this is a 2-page story, essentially. A strong sense of food, of, gender expectations, gender roles. So what else do you notice about place and how it's rendered here?
Well, I think there's a pretty clear sense of a rural setting and or at least a non-city setting, and the economics here are very potent. you have to conserve your money. You're going to be cooking, you're going to be growing your okra, you're going to need to know where the red ants can move from. And so there's a sense of having to survive. The feeling of what it would take to survive turns on eating and money, as well as sex and attitudes between men and women. So it's a precarious life.
That's wonderful, Alex. I'd actually not thought as much about the economics that are conveyed through this. I mean, that's brilliant. Absolutely, that's very much on display. And we get a connection also, we have a sense of this very visceral connection to the land, right? Whether it's the growing, the interaction with flora, fauna, and the necessity of the land to this survival that Alex is talking about. Yeah, absolutely. So I offer this as a really great example of how you can go beyond, the obvious in your renderings of place, and use all the tools at your disposal to create a strong sense of place. I'll just leave you with this thought too, which Kincaid is this choice that she's made to not name the place. What's that about? What do you make of that?
For me, I figured, maybe she didn't name it because it's a place that could exist anywhere. And, the things that she was describing, anyone could really, experience in any place. So I think by not naming it, she kind of kept it, inclusive for everyone. Everyone can, anyone can relate to it.
Yeah, exactly. She's not sort of leaning on almost an exoticizing of like, ooh, this is how we do things here. She's leaning on the universality of this, parent-child dynamic. And food. Yes, we have highly specific names for dishes and food that if you Google, you're going to find out where those foods are eaten. So that's kind of fun too. She's offering us little pieces of a puzzle. If her reader is not from that place, right, that we can find out. But at the same time, she's not belaboring it. She's saying that this is what they're eating here, but I'm not going to be like, ooh, this is so like what my friend from Pakistan, my writer friend, calls scented literature, where it's really overly exoticizing place. She's not doing that here. So Alex, you were going to say something, did you?
I was going to say that the tone, of course, the imperative is all this authority, but there's another level of authority in never acknowledging that there's any other world. So it's this incredibly specific place, which to almost all of us as readers is unfamiliar. And yet it is the only place that exists in the world. So blotting out everything else makes it incredibly powerful. We're starting with Washington. The name of our character is Girl, this generic, non-specific person. There is no other world. So I think the power of it is how we're at this pinpoint, tiny spot that doesn't see anything else.
Yeah, this place holds primacy. And Jamaica Kincaid is saying, look at this place. This place has value. And it's also interestingly telling us about these characters' sort of worldview in sort of an oblique way, Alex, which touches on what you had mentioned about like the economics and survival. Like these characters are not like pausing and sitting in their studies and thinking about, philosophizing about the world. They're not jetting off to XYZ. They're very much attached to this place out of necessity in a lot of ways too. So yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I'll say is by not naming the place specifically, she's not privileging a West, I don't want to say Western because the Caribbean is the West, but she's not privileging like an American audience. So she's not saying like, hey, for all you guys out there who don't know where I'm talking about, like this is in St. John's, or like, this is in, you know, Antigua or whatever. She's saying like, hey, if you don't know these things, go look them up, do some research. Like, you know, I'm not going to do your work for you. And then it won't be off-putting to somebody who is from that place, who's going to be like, well, duh, like, I know where this is. Like, I know all these things. I know what Bena is. Like, so, and I have a friend named Jofor Ile, who's a writer from Nigeria, and he does the same thing in this beautiful story that he's written that's called Fisherman's Stew. He never mentions Nigeria in it, but like, if you go look up, again, the food, or like some of the companies he names, these big Nigerian oil companies, you'll find out. But he didn't want to write it for an audience that didn't know that it was Nigeria. Like, he wanted his Nigerian friends to be able to read it and not be kicked out of the story by this line of like, here's where we are. So I thought that's really interesting. So something, again, to consider when you think you need to make something obvious to a readership, a broader readership, question that, interrogate that a little bit. And you might not need to. So, and have some faith in your reader that they want to do some work. And readers actually really enjoy a little puzzling out and a little learning. And sometimes, even if you don't want to go to Google and look it up, you don't need to. This story stands on its own, right? It's an amazing, powerful, funny, like, moving, maddening story all on its own. So I have kept you past our time. On that note, thank you all so much for being here. It's really been a joy to get to know you. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and please do reach out at any time to talk or with questions about the writing life, whatever. If you're passing through Ohio, Shalita, if you're ever down Columbus Way, come visit me. There I am. Any questions before we all head off to our very distinct, different places? All right. Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.